Science and the City, we try to bring together sessions, a collection of sessions that will make sense or help us make sense of the world around us. And the session that we have right now is on scars. And these are not the emotional scars, but the physical scars. So what we're trying to, we're actually trying to get into the nitty-gritties of the biology here and also excite all of you here with that biology. The reason we think that it is exciting because our body knows and has mechanisms to keep some of these scars and take away some of the other scars. So some places, I have some of these scars which are memories of good and bad things in my life. And at the same time, there are other scars that the body just leaves no trace of. So what is exactly body doing? Why is body doing all of these? And we hope that you will be excited in asking and understanding these questions as much as we think they are. So the experts who will be leading these sessions are Dr. Shayan Basu, who is Director of Research at the city's very, very reputed L.V. Prasad Eye Institute, and Dr. Shweta Chakravarti, who is joining us from Manipal University, Bangalore. And their session will be moderated by Dr. Rohini Subramaniam, who is, if I may say, our generation's most prolific science writer at the moment. She's been writing in Scientific American, to New Scientist, to The Hindu. International and nationally, her articles are really, really celebrated at the moment. So welcome them all on the stage.
Hello? Yeah, okay. So, thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting us. Okay, yeah, so I guess Somnath already introduced you guys. So we can start talking about scars. So, so for most of us, I think they are like annoying reminders of like some past scrape or scuffle that we had or something like that. Or I feel that in some cases, they're also like reminders of some painful surgery or accident, so it can also have some kind of negative connotation. So, but sometimes, they're just like some fond childhood memory that we remember, and depending on how small the scar is. But if we go deeper, like if we go deeper into the wound, so to say, there is so much sort of biology happening below the surface of the scar as well. There's like the blood gets clotted, and then there's immune cells that kick in and start cleaning up the bacteria and stuff, and then the skin cells have to start laying down the groundwork for like patching up the wound very quickly. So all of this is sort of happening under the surface. So, but one thing for sure is that scar tissue is sort of very different from regular healthy tissue. So for some reason, the body sort of chooses to quickly repair instead of going into the long drawn process of regeneration and coming up with perfectly healthy tissue. It quickly decides to stitch up the wound and sort of make like a quick, almost like, so one article I read where they called a scar a living band-aid. So it's like just like a quick thing to move on. So I guess to start with, Dr. Shayan, I wanted to ask you, like, why do we scar? Like, evolutionarily, is there some advantage? Like, why is this sort of hasty healing procedure that our body goes into? Is it helpful in some cases? I'm guessing in some cases it's harmful, like your work on corneal scarring and like scarring in the eye. I'm guessing that's something that's more dangerous, whereas like something like like in skin, I think scars are something that's more cosmetic in some cases. So is scarring is it something that's helpful or harmful, or is it something that's context dependent on where the scar is in?
So that's a very, very interesting question. So the reason that we scar is because from a evolutionary point of view, we prioritize survival over function. So whenever there is trauma or wounding, the body tries to heal as quickly as possible, which helps us survive the trauma. And restoration of function is like a secondary thing that happens slowly over time. If we were not to do that, so if you imagine a situation where you would heal without scarring or regrow, like there are other species in which this can happen, like that a lizard, if you cut off its tail, can grow its tail back, okay? Or for those of you who have seen this movie, have you seen Deadpool? How many of you have seen Deadpool? So, like you can't kill Deadpool, you can only, cut off his limbs and it grows back, whichever way you harm him. But if you have seen the movie which correctly portrays how it would happen if you could actually be able to do it, like he has to spend days or weeks when his limbs are growing back and he's very vulnerable during that period. So if you think in terms of evolution, if we were to regrow instead of repair, or if we could regenerate, grow our limbs back or our injured parts back instead of scarring, then it would take a lot of time. It would make us very vulnerable during that period. And from an evolutionary point of view, it would make us weak and therefore less able to survive that. So we have, I think, gained this ability to scar so that we can prioritize survival over function. And then function is kind of, it's something that is lower down on the priority list, especially for eyes. Because we have two eyes and because mostly people get injured in one, so you can still function with the other while the eye that you're injured in repairs and scars, etc. So you lose a bit of function for some time. And like you correctly said, there is also this ability of you wound, you heal, you scar, but the scar also remodels over time. So, over several weeks or several months, in many cases over several years, the scars do get better and less apparent, or in terms of in the eye you can see better because they become clearer over time. And so there is this whole process that is also going on.
Okay. So yeah, asking you a bit more about like corneal, like maybe complicated cases of corneal scarring, like so that's something that you work on at LVPEI, right? And also as a consulting ophthalmologist, like I'm guessing you see cases of like high risk corneal scarring cases or some kind of issues in the eye. So is that, so do corneal scars heal? Like is that something that over time I think you said that, so they do get better over time, or in some cases you need some kind of intervention and yeah.
Yeah, so again, great question. So the cornea basically is this part of the eyeball which is transparent usually. So when you look at somebody and you look at their eye color, the reason that you can see the color is actually the color inside the eye of the iris, not of the cornea. The cornea is transparent, so it's biologically very fascinating. That's one of the few tissues in the human body that are completely transparent. The only other tissue in the body which is completely transparent are some of the fluids and also the lens, which is also in the eye. So a lot of the things that are in the eye are transparent for obvious reasons, because it's a optical system, like lenses, it functions like a camera, and you have to have transparency for vision. So the problem with scarring in the cornea, which happens when you get injured or there's an infection, is that unlike in the skin, where like you correctly said that when you scar, you just leave behind at the most a cosmetic deficit, that there is an ugly looking part of the skin. But in the eye, when it happens, that scar causes an opacity. So it leaves a whitish mark, which interferes with vision. So depending on how bad the injury was, how long it took for the wound to heal, and also other factors like whether it got infected while it was healing or not, that basically influences how bad the scar will be. So when we say how bad, clinically it means how opaque the scar is or how deep the scar is. So the more the opacity or the more the depth, the less functional vision the patient will have through that eye when it heals. Luckily though, most corneal scarring as a result of injury or infection, like I said before, happens in one eye. So usually you can function with the other eye while this eye is healing. And also what you said correctly is there is a lot of what we call remodeling. So when a scar develops, the opacity, depending on, like I said, the severity, the depth, the amount of opacity, whether it got infected or not, how much inflammation is there, what is the age of the patient, the scars will remodel over time. Some scars will become completely transparent over time. So we see this in, smaller children, younger people, that when they get an infection, they get a scar. you see them after a few months or a year, you can hardly make out that they had the injury. You can maybe make out on very advanced, sophisticated imaging, but if you look at it with the naked eye or on microscope, you won't see it. But other scars, older individuals, if you have other problems with your health, they may not completely go away. And that is what causes the functional deficit, is how much visual problems you're left with when the scar doesn't go away.
Okay, now moving on to Dr. Shweta. So Dr. Shweta runs a lab at the Manipal Institute of Regenerative Medicine, where she works with the fruit fly, Drosophila, and she studies the role of immunity and inter-organ communication in wound healing in Drosophila and tissue repair. So yeah, just to, I guess, like start with, I'm curious how you study wound healing in Drosophila, because it's like such a small creature. Like, how do you even inflict a wound in a fruit fly without like squashing it all together? So I'm just curious how.
Yeah, I think we've lost a lot of flies to inexperienced undergrad students, so I understand what you're saying. It requires a bit of skill. So, but we manipulate the flies under a microscope, so we can actually be able to see it very well, because with the naked eye, they're too small. And then we can use, there are different ways. So there are research labs which will use very precise lasers to make a precise wound, which would be just 1 or 2 cells. The way we do it in our lab is sort of brute force. We use a very thin tungsten needle, which we sterilize, and then we injure basically sort of under the wing of the fly, because that's very robust tissue. It's the flight muscle. It's a very thick tissue. So even if we go superficially with a needle, the fly is able to clot and heal itself, and then able to function properly in terms of its physiology, fly, eat, forage, and so forth. So that's how we do the wounding paradigm in my lab.
Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
but you can get as precise as 1 or 2 cells by using lasers, which people do at a little bit earlier stages in development, like in the eggs. So we would take the eggs under a microscope, and then with a very powerful laser, just create a very precise wound.
Okay, nice. And could you tell us a bit about your research? Like, what have you like found, and what are your thoughts on like inter-organ communication? And because I guess in a fly it's a bit easier to as compared to like in a human, where there's of course so many things happening. But yeah, in a fly, like so, how are the different organs working together in
Yes,
wound
I mean,
healing?
when we think of wounding, we really think about the specific place that you wound. So for example, if your skin gets hurt, or as the example like you said about the eye, and you think that everything will be happening just at that place. But what we find in our research is, as an organism, we are not like a closed system that if you harm one, only that place will respond. You will have communication between that place to other organs in your body. And in our research, what we found, what was very interesting is your blood cells, which are there in the wounding response, to actually act first to clean up anything that gets into the wound, because we live in a very contaminated environment. If you have a wound, of course, bacteria, fungi, whatever will get into the site of the wound. So the job of the blood cells is to clear all those threats. But what we are able to see is, in the remodeling as well as the proliferation phase, as well, these blood cells are important to tell the other cell types, okay, now is the correct time for you to start dividing, lay the scaffold. What do you do at what time? The blood cells are also very important in that. And in my research, what we find is these blood cells can actually move to different sites of the body and tell even very distant sites that there has been an injury, and some sort of a change has to happen at the organ function to be able to sustain either a inflammation or a cell division, a proliferation. So that's something very interesting that we're finding in the flies is, after you wound a site, those blood cells, of course, act as, cleaning up all the garbage, but then they also are talking about what's happened there to the other tissues. And that's very important, because if we block that by using genetics that we have in fruit flies for more than 100 years, we can see, yes, later on, if we go and infect the fly with a very benign bacteria, which normally eats in the food, its other organs are not functioning properly. So this, this communication is sort of very important to know that there has been an injury somewhere and how other organs need to change accordingly. Yeah.
And what about the gut as an organ? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so in our work, what we found actually is that, so in humans, about 70% of your immune cells are actually always sampling the gut. Like it's the organ which is always in contact with the immune system. And in the flies, there's not really a organ like a spleen or something to tell the gut that there's something that's happening. So what we found surprisingly is that the blood cells, once they know, okay, here's a site of wound in the muscle, they will then go and migrate to the gut. We see days later, they're going and sticking onto the gut of the flies. What are they doing there? It seems that if we can block that, over the lifespan of the fly, the gut starts to become leaky, there is change in the microbiota. So the functioning of the gut gets impacted over time if you hamper this communication between what has happened to the gut, and the gut is a very important. So for the fruit fly, it's really important to know what happens in the gut is because it eats continuously rotting fruits, vegetables. So if it's eating those, it's always in contact with any pathogen, you know, whatever is in rotting. Of course, you have fungi, bacteria, it's a plethora of microbes there. So it needs to sort of heighten up its other organ, which could get contaminated food. And it looks like the blood cells are the ones, and the gut is critical. It looks like after a wound, one of the main tissues we find that responds is the intestine. And there are long-term changes that happened even weeks after the initial wound, which stay in the intestine. So it looks like it's important. And it's also been shown for humans, patients who, like of atopic dermatitis, who are scratching a lot, there are changes seen in their gut as well. They become more susceptible to oral allergens, which normally they wouldn't be, but there's something the immune system is doing once they sense that wound and sending signals to the gut, which is changing the susceptibility or the reactivity of the gut, even in the case of humans. So we're trying to use flies as a way so that we can tease apart what exactly are those blood cells doing, and can we block it, or you know, what can we do to make the reaction, like in the case of the flies, the gut's better. So, yeah.
And it's nice that you mentioned the immune system, because that was also something I wanted to ask maybe both of you. Like, just like the, yeah, I guess like how our body remembers some scars and forgets some scars, like does the immune, like is it known in flies and also in humans in any case, if the immune system also remembers some wounds and some scars, and does that help in any way in the future? Yeah, that's something I was curious about. Yeah.
So, you know, the immune system definitely has memory. And one of the things that we tend to remember through our immune system is, you know, just like we remember past trauma, the immune system also remembers what hurt or caused infection, etc. So, for example, we tend to remember viral infections that we had. In fact, we have, you know, species level memory of that. You know, infections that may not be relevant now, but our body has memory of it because this has been passed on through our genes. Especially if the same kind of trauma occurs again, then your body tends to react faster to that because our immune system keeps memory of that. And this is very important, relevant clinically, especially in the area of the science of transplantation. So, you know, people who have organ transplantation, it's relevant for corneal transplantation also, that if somebody's had a transplant, the body remembers the transplant, and especially if it has failed. So somebody who has a failure of organ transplantation has a higher chance that the next transplant will fail because the body remembers, you know, that this happened, that a foreign organ was transplanted in the body, and it has the molecular signatures that it can identify next time that happens again.
So, I mean, in terms of the immune system, so in all of us, we have the immune system which is broadly divided into two. One is called the innate, that is what you're born with, and the other is the adaptive, that, you know, your cells trained by all the antigens that are there in the environment. So, of course, in humans, you have the adaptive system, you have B cells, you have T cells, and that's how vaccines work. You remember when you were infected with a low dose of a any pathogen, and then the next time your immune response is really good and you don't get the disease. So that's exactly how we vaccinate. But in flies, they don't have any antibodies, they don't have any B cells, they don't have any adaptive system at all. And if you think about their natural habitat, insects are the most prolific beings. They're everywhere, they're doing really well, but they don't have an antibody response. How are they able to survive in so many different types of climates and different, regions when they only have an innate immune response? It turns out from our work that we've seen is even a simple injury will confer some sort of a memory, even if it comes to those cells which normally are not supposed to keep memory. So in the field of immunology, memory is associated with just your adaptive cells, that is T cells and B cells. Scientists don't think that other cells like macrophages, neutrophils, and other cells actually keep any kind of memory. But what we find is flies only have those cells. But if I wound a fly, and then a few days later, I come in with something very much pathogenic, that fly that was wounded survives better. It's able to deal with a deadly pathogen, which normally a naive fly wouldn't be able to. So it's turning out that the memory can be even in these primitive cells, as they're called in immunology, but even they can keep some sort of, and that brings the field of epigenetics and reprogramming, where cells can remember what's happened in their past by changing the way their DNA folds. So if your DNA is more open, you express the genes to kill the bugs better. So basically, because they've had an injury, their DNA is opened up, and then the next time a pathogen comes, boom, they produce all the peptides that would be needed to kill the microbials that would be useful for killing the pathogen. So definitely the immune system does keep memory. But of course, there's a good and a bad to it. And in the case definitely of the transplantation, that's where, if keeping the memory makes things worse in the next transplantation. Yeah.
So allergy is also a good example, if you can think of it in that terms of memory, because the body is able to triage what is innocuous and what is dangerous, and so over a period of time we are exposed to so many things in the environment and also what goes into our body, but the way that the body responds or adapts is that you triage through whatever is coming in or whatever the immune system is coming in contact with, and they are able to, make a judgment and say, okay, this is not harmful, so you don't need to react to this every time, So I'm sure all of you have seen like a newborn, the first time a newborn gets a mosquito bite, they get a really bad reaction to it, okay? But then over a period of time, that reaction becomes milder and milder, and they react then the same way that we do on a mosquito bite, which is that you just have a little bit of swelling for a few minutes and it goes away. But allergy exactly is the dysfunction of this memory, that you're not able to differentiate between what is harmful and what is innocuous, and that you take a longer time to develop this tolerance or this memory. Okay, this is not bad. I don't need to react as violently to this. And so those people who have any form of allergy, it's because your body is not able to develop that memory or tolerance that this is good or bad. And it takes more time. And most people outgrow their allergies, and this is the exact process of you taking more time to develop that memory.
Nice. And yeah, I guess again, going back to the previous thing we talked about, the gut. So is that one of the things that plays a role in both in sort of like maybe an overactive allergy response in some cases, or also is that also playing a role in the Drosophila remembering, like, okay, this wound has happened and then now I can react in this way? Like, is the gut one major organ that maybe in case of allergies it's maybe not a very good thing, and in case of the good memory situation, is it helpful? Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that the statement that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So in the case of the fly, the wound that we inflict, if the fly survives, is able to clot, and if its immune response is optimum, then later on when we come, and actually now work being done by some of my students, what we find is it's not a very specific protection to only one kind of a bug. It looks like it's what he just said, the word tolerance. So it looks like the immune response has to happen again, but sometimes your immune response can be bad for you. So the way the immune response comes back again in a way that you kill the pathogen, but you don't harm, collateral damage. So the immune response, whenever it gets triggered, whenever your cells go to a site, they produce a lot of molecules that will not just kill the pathogens or the bacteria, viruses, they will also kill your cells. So this training that the injury or the wounding does is to optimally respond to certain pathogens. And what we surprisingly find is when there is an overactivation of the immune response, that's what's killing the flies, and that doesn't happen to a trained fly. So it kind of goes in both directions. It's not just about killing and getting rid of it, but to respond in an optimum way. And how the gut does in that, I think that's what we have to understand, because, I mean, the gut is host to all the kind of, viruses and fungi and bacteria normally are associated with it. So it's always sampling all these kind of patterns from them and learning from them all the time, and then sending those signals to the rest of the immune system. So I think, yes, the gut could be something critical, because as I said, it's the interface of our body with the outside. When we eat food, when we sample anything. So that's why it could be very important in this training. Yeah.
So what is interesting is that, all of us, we carry more like bacterial DNA than human DNA with us every day. And most of this, the bacteria are in our gut and also on our skin, which are the two largest organs, or at least organs with the largest amount of surface area. And it is very, very important because, this enormous amount and the enormous diverse spectrum of microbes that we carry on our body, they have obviously a very important relationship with our health. It's only recently that we have started to understand this relationship, right? So this whole research now on microbiome and what is our microbiota, our gut microbiome, our skin microbiome. We even have, I can see Aruna Sri in the audience, she's working on the ocular microbiome, the microbiome in the eye. There's now some evidence to say even areas we thought that were completely sterile, that inside the eye, there are resident microbiota, there are resident organisms that you can find DNA signatures even there. And obviously there is a connection. We don't understand this connection very well, but there are obvious connections. For example, if somebody has a certain type of diet, they have a certain type of microbiome, and they tend to have lesser metabolic diseases as well. For diabetes, this is very well known. Like the Mediterranean diet is supposed to be very good. And if somebody is consuming that diet, of course physical activity and all of that is also related, but they tend to have certain good bacteria that we call healthy or are more helpful for us than bad bacteria in their gut. And that has, I think, a very deep relationship with how we heal, how we respond to trauma. Not that we understand all of it, but this is something that is a very interesting area of research right now, microbiomes, especially gut microbiome.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, I guess from scars, we really went deep into immunology and gut microbiome. But I guess the gut plays a role in everything, so it makes sense that we...
So just to give you an example, like if you're diabetic, your wounds heal slower, right? So this is very well known. And the longer you've been a diabetic or the worse your diabetic control is, your wound healing is worse. So the chances that, as surgeons, we have to be careful, and that's why it's very important that whenever somebody is getting surgery, unless it's an emergency surgery, that the blood sugar has to be controlled. Because if your blood sugar is high, if your diabetes is uncontrolled, that means that even if you inflict a surgical trauma, which is a very controlled wound, it might not heal properly, it might get infected. So metabolism, gut microbiota, general health, all of these very, very closely affect our wound healing and to what extent, how we'll scar, how we'll heal, and how our body will react to trauma.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess it'll be nice to now talk a bit about the future. So you work in your research on the idea of scarless wound healing in the cornea, if that's a possibility. And so just like how we spoke about in the beginning of how the body chooses to repair over regenerate. But yeah, is it is there research happening? Is it possible to push it more towards regeneration such that maybe in some cases, instead of like a hasty repair and a scar, maybe the body can actually like heal completely and have like, yeah, ideally scarless wound healing? Like, is that a possibility in the future?
Yes, definitely. So we live in very exciting times. There's a lot of work which is being done right now in regenerative medicine, which is exactly about this. That this switch between repair and regrowth or repair and regeneration, where instead when we heal or when our tissues in our body heal, instead of forming a scar which is disorganized and which leaves us with a functional deficit or a cosmetic deficit, you can move towards completely normal tissue, both structurally and functionally, both in its appearance and also in its function. And a lot of this work is being done. There's stem cell research that's happening in this area. There's also a lot of work in terms of pharmacological solutions. So you identify certain molecules which are important in this wound healing mechanism, which control that switch of whether you will go towards repair or whether the body will go towards regeneration. And then finally, there's also a lot of exciting work that is being done in bioengineering and with biomaterials. So there are certain materials that you can use in a wound or at the time of wounding or after even the wounding has happened that can influence how the wound behaves and whether it scars or it does not scar. So I think I saw Nirmal in the audience. He's at BITS. He works on this, combination of pharmacology and biomaterials. And a lot of interesting work is happening in this area, not only in the eye, but in other parts of the body as well.
And I think with the example of the chronic wounds with diabetes, definitely bioengineering because what happens is that these patients, because of their problems in metabolism, are not able to make the factors which are important for the regrowth, for the stem cell division. And so what you do is you put a material there at the wound that will tell your normal stem cells. If the stem cells are less, yes, you can put stem cells there, but normally the signals are not there to tell the stem cells. You have to divide, you have to cover the wound, you have to migrate. So you can put a material which has those, goodies which normally your blood cells or others would produce at the right time, so that you can push those chronic wounds from becoming chronic so that they can start healing. So definitely I think in the diabetes field and in the place where wounds take a long time to heal, there's a lot that's happening. Yes.
Yeah, I also read a bit about how, I guess there's some research in mice as well where they're trying to do like scarless wound healing, and how there are different types of skin cells, I guess, that some are sort of, they are more focused on, I guess, regeneration, and some are more focused on just quickly patching up the wound. So I guess if you can flip the switch and focus more on like a slow healing, then in that case maybe. And I also read a bit about how like in the fetus, I'm guessing that something about the fetal structure, like if there's a scar in the fetus, then if there is a wound in the fetus, then that heals without scarring. Is that so? Is that what's so different about like the fetal body that why would that not scar, as opposed to as soon as we are born, I guess we start developing the ability to scar?
Very interesting question. You want to take it? No, you take it. So the reason for that is that the baby, as the baby is growing in the mother, it doesn't have an immune signature. Correct? So the mother, when the mother is carrying the baby, does not identify the baby as foreign, as another individual. Okay? Because if that were to happen, then you would have immune rejection.
Yeah, just destroy
right?
the baby. Yeah.
Right. So even other than if you're taking from like a monozygotic twin, even from your siblings or even people who are completely HLA matched, any tissue or organ from another donor, the body is eventually able to figure out that this is foreign. And that's why people who get organ transplants have to be on immunosuppression to keep the immune system dumbed down so that they don't react. But when the fetus is inside the mother, it does not elicit that response because the fetus does not have an immune signature, does not even have an evolved or developed immune system. So it can't scar. Neither can it scar by itself, nor can the mother inflict a scar on the baby while it is in the womb. So it's a very amazing area of biology, fetal biology, and how we have developed this very sophisticated process of survival in the womb.
I mean, and if we think of why a scar has to be there, basically it's a physical plug so that from the external environment you don't get something entering in which would harm your body. So if we think of a fetus, it's already in a very protected environment away from all the pathogens which I was talking about before. So the immune response wouldn't, even if they have a very primitive response, so they have the immune innate cells, the neutrophils, but all of the signaling in them is very down because the levels of adenosine are very high, and because of that particular chemical, all the blood cells don't respond so well. So it also makes them susceptible to certain infections. So if the mother passes a viral infection or others, the fetus is very susceptible to that. But the other side is because their immune response is not developed, they don't scar. So, yeah.
The other interesting aspect is that fetal membranes are sometimes used as wound healing material. So he was talking about biomaterials. So from the placenta, after delivery, we get what is known as the amniotic membrane. So you separate the amniotic membrane. Amniotic sac is the sac in which the baby is, the yolk sac essentially. So one of the layers is taken, and it is used routinely clinically for wound repair, even in the eye. So particularly in patients with burns, etc., who have very bad injury when you have to cover the whole eye, we use part of the amnion, the placenta, to cover that. And that is known to have this special wound healing properties where you get, like we were talking about, scarless, less scarring, less inflammation, anti-inflammatory.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess, maybe just like a last sort of a maybe open-ended question that, so I'm guessing like I said in the beginning also that scars are not always painful. I mean, in many cases they are very like terrible like mementos to carry forward, as like they're very painful reminders of some bad incident that occurred that you would rather not remember. But yeah, in some cases scars are sort of more like happy, not necessarily happy, but maybe some kind of nostalgic memory from some minor injury in the past, or some childhood event, or some small thing that happened when you were cooking, and then you just it's not something that maybe sometimes it can carry significance as well, and maybe you would not choose to forget them. So, but what are your thoughts on this sort of future of, suppose we are able to regulate our molecular processes to the extent that we can have perfect scarless wound healing in the future? What are your thoughts on such a future where we can choose to keep some scars but choose to erase some? Is that, would that be something that's to strive for, or is it best to sort of leave it to the body to figure out the way it's been doing it all these years?
No, definitely we, don't want too much of scarring and the sequelae or the consequences of scarring in certain parts of our body, especially in response to infection, trauma, etc., etc. So this is a whole area of research in biomedical science which is going on right now, which we are involved in understanding scarring, and like we're discussing, in flipping the switch from repair to regeneration, so that in the eye, when you have a wound, it heals with as little scarring as possible so that we don't lose any functional vision. Similarly, in other critical parts of the body, trauma from accidents, road traffic accidents, or in, for example, on the battlefield, or any other combat, where you can get critical injuries that can lead to bad scarring, and therefore people are left with, they are unable to do certain things, or their life is severely restricted or affected. So you definitely want to take care of that. All scars are not necessarily, you don't need to treat. There's always also this huge aspect or area of cosmetic surgery, and getting rid of scarring because it's only a cosmetic issue. There, of course, it may be on a priority list of all of the things that we are doing in science, it's lower down. But I think it's also important, and there's a lot of work that is being done on that as well. So you have that get rid of scars that you have on the skin, etc. There are some scars we choose to have. For example, You know, how many of you have tattoos? You know, so tattoos are a form of scarring, you know, if they were not, it's a little bit, but just enough so that they don't go away. Otherwise, if it was just the ink, then your body would wash it out. So the ink is, you know, put in deep enough so that it causes a little bit of scarring, so that it stays forever. So some scars we choose to have, some we would rather get rid of. And I think, so that part is choice. But in other areas where it's more critical, I think we'd rather not have scarring and would have function.
I mean, I think the function of the tissue is really important. And if I circle back to when we started, why do we scar? The reason we scar is to keep us safe and survive. So as we're going more and more in developing our environments, getting cleaner, those threats are getting away from us. I guess maybe in a foreseeable future, we could choose if we wanted to keep some scars versus others, because, you know, that threat which was normally there for hunter-gatherer is not there anymore. So much our, you know, environments. And that's why actually in certain ways, when we are not exposing the immune response to these kind of challenges, maybe there might be other problems that might happen. Like allergy, there is this notion of it being a hygiene hypothesis because of too much of a clean environment. So maybe, you know, this effect of the scar might in fact educate your immune system for the future, which right now we feel, okay, we don't need it at all, but maybe it's a good training for the immune system, which we might discover later that, you know, it was not something to get rid of completely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Shweta said something very critical, that you don't want to get rid of the body's ability to scar, you know, because that would be harmful. But you may want to control how badly it scars or how severely it scars and mitigate that process. Because if you did not have that, so this is very important, and it's a big problem now that you don't, like kids are not exposed enough, and they tend to develop allergies more because they're not going through this process of developing tolerance. So there's a lot of adult onset allergy now that we didn't have before, because as kids we didn't get exposed to certain things in the environment which we get exposed to as adults, and you develop allergy. So the process definitely has to be in place. You have to allow the body to develop this or have the mechanism to react to develop tolerance or to even scar if necessary, because that is important to survive, because you will not always be in a situation where you have the time and opportunity to, you know, it might be critical for your survival that you are able to scar. So you don't want to get rid of the body's ability to do that. But when you are scarring, you want to modulate that process just enough to have the right balance, that you don't scar too much.
Okay, yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah, maybe if we can open the audience for some questions.
Yeah, oh, lovely talk actually. Thank you very much for your insights. Are there any gender differences in scar process and so on? Cultural differences we know, but physiological ones, I mean.
There are. I think that depending on who you are, there are a lot of factors. Gender factors are also there, and it is true that there are certain kind of responses or diseases, or the extent to which the body will react in certain cases is gender based. Therefore, like a lot of, when we do animal experiments also, trying to understand the basic biology of disease, there is a gender bias, that the experiments will only be done in certain kinds of animals and not in others, because there are too many confounding elements there. So there is definitely. I don't know how deeply it is studied, but at least clinically we know that there are differences.
Yeah, so if I go back to my own research, I just told you some time back that the blood cells can move to the gut and change the function of the gut. Well, in fruit flies, the gut of a male and a female is very different in its regenerative capacity. And so the response that you see in males and females is quite different. And the sexual dimorphism that's there in nature in insects is huge. So of course we expect the immune response, and in this case, the communication between the immune response and the gut to be very different. But how it affects scarring, I think that's not very clear, at least with the work that we're doing. But definitely, when we do the experiments, we try to do them in females as well as males, so we can understand the effect on both the genders. At least in fruit flies, that's possible. With mouse experiments, you usually do them in male mice, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think just to expand upon that, I had a similar question because evolutionarily, female humans, they are trained, I mean, evolutionarily, they are trained to appear better. So maybe for my son, for example, I went for a, he had a scar here, he had an injury here, and the doctor said if it was a female child, the parents would have said, treat it very better. But since it's a boy, I don't care that much. So is there actually a difference? But as you said, maybe you are not clear. Another question I had is, since fruit flies, they show a lot of changes quite fast. So do the changes carry over genetically? Like, do their offspring show the same immune response? Uh, yeah, I mean, that's the question.
Yeah, I'll take the fly question first because it's a less loaded question. So, the fruit fly question about this transgenerational sort of, response that we see, it's already very short-lived. So, flies don't live, their lifespan is very short. They live in the lab when we keep them with food which is uncontaminated and we keep them with constant, light, humidity, everything, they will live to about 60 days. In those conditions, it's about a week till where we see the memory, after which the response fades away. So it's not like it's a lifelong memory, but we haven't tested like repeated challenges and how that would change this response from the blood cells to the ovaries. We've not really tested it. So in our work, we don't really find anything beyond that particular fly, and that too for a certain amount of time. It's not for its whole life that it's showing some sort of protection. So that's how much I can speak about the fruit flies. Yeah.
The first part of your question is very fascinating. It's about societal tolerance. So you are right that, the example that you cited, that especially when there are injuries, etc., or infection that cause a cosmetic blemish, the threshold for parents or families to bring the child for treatment of that is much lower if it's a female, or earlier, they bring them in earlier if they're, children for girls than for boys. And this is interesting because like we get a lot of, I work a lot with people who have had burn injuries to the eye. Okay, so that's always been a part of our research. Balu is sitting here. He started that maybe 2 decades ago at LVPI. So we treat patients and children who have had burns. And in our country, there are very unique ways of how people get burn injuries to their eye. That's a separate discussion. But for boys, they will usually come in, even if they've had the injury when they were 3 or 4 years old, they will come in when they are in their late teens or early 20s, because that's when they're planning to get married. And we know that we can't restore vision to their eye, but they'll say, if you can make the eye look better, that's fine. For girls, they come in much earlier because their cosmetic concern is, from a societal standpoint, the threshold is lower.
I think one more question we can ask. Yeah.
Post-surgery, some scars remain in the body, and I have some of them. I find that portion of the scar is less elastic than the normal skin around
Yes.
it. Is there any work going on to make it as elastic as normal skin?
Yes, a lot of work going on. There are a lot of things that can be used in the immediate post-operative period to make sure that the tissue is not as inelastic, as rough, and also similar to natural tissue. This can be done later on also, which is basically what we are working on in the eye, but people are working in other parts of the body as well. You have scars that you can apply some treatment to it so that it becomes more elastic. But what we also have to be mindful of is how your scar behaves is not permanent. So if your general health goes down, your scars can also start behaving differently. For example, now it doesn't happen as much, but just to give you an example, micronutrient deficiency is one of them. So scurvy, which used to be very common earlier, the interesting thing about when people got scurvy is that their old wounds would open up. Even bones that had broken, many decades ago and had healed, they would refracture, because one of the very important elements of that scar are these micronutrients. If you have this deficiency, then they can start behaving abnormally. So you have to take care of your health. All of us have scars. And, you know, of course, scars, whether they're visible or invisible, physical or emotional, they make us who we are. So we also have to take care of our scars and take care of our general bodies to make sure that our scars don't trouble us.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. If there are more questions, maybe you can catch the panelists outside. But yeah, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the panelists for it's really fun discussion. Okay, yeah. Yeah. I guess just to sort of, because I spoke to Somdatta before this and she said that I should try and summarize the panel towards the end. But yeah, but just to sort of give a brief summary of what we talked about, like, yeah, we learned a lot about scarring and went really deep into the immune aspect and the gut and how even allergies play a role in, and how the immune system affects allergies. So yeah, so basically, I think scarring is a really interesting topic of research that's happening, and yeah, and there's a lot of research happening in mice as well about how to create skin that's healthy and not like scar tissue. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time in like scar-based research. So yeah, anyway, thank you all for being a really nice audience. Yeah.